In the autumn of 1874, a column of U.S. cavalry was moving across the Texas Panhandle, and they were in trouble. Not from enemy fire, not from terrain, from the weather. A norther was blowing in off the open plains, the kind of wind that has nothing to stop it for 300 miles. And these men were still wearing their summer uniforms. They were exhausted, underfed, and the temperature was dropping fast. Some of them had never been west of the Mississippi before this campaign. None of them were ready for what the Llano Estacado does to a human body after dark. Somewhere out ahead of them, in the same wind, under the same sky, the Comanche bands they were chasing were getting ready to sleep. Not huddled and desperate, not barely hanging on, sleeping, comfortable enough to wake rested, break camp, and ride hard at dawn. The soldiers behind them were shaking. The people they were pursuing were not. So ask yourself the obvious question: how? How does a people with no insulated buildings, no furnaces, no synthetic materials, no supply lines, survive nights that were quietly destroying a column of equipped, professional soldiers? The easy answer is toughness. And the easy answer is wrong. Every culture on those plains was tough. Toughness is not a furnace. Toughness does not keep your blood warm at 2 in the morning when the ground is frozen solid and the wind is pulling heat out of your body faster than your body can make it. The real answer was a system. 6 interlocking layers, each one engineered to solve a specific problem that extreme cold creates, and each one making every other layer more effective. And here is what I want you to hold on to as we go through each of these layers. The last one, the one that almost nobody talks about, is the reason the U.S. Army eventually stopped trying to beat this system in the field. They decided the only move left was to erase it entirely. We'll get there, but first, you need to understand what they were actually up against. What does it mean to truly belong to a place? Not just live in it, but be so woven into it, so fluent in its rhythms and its cruelties that its worst nights cannot touch you. The Comanche had an answer to that question. It took them generations to build, and it worked so well that the most powerful military force on the continent had to burn it to the ground to win. The first layer wasn't something they built, it was something they chose. Every autumn, as temperatures began to fall and the buffalo herds shifted south, Comanche bands moved off the exposed high plains and down into the canyon systems that cut through the Caprock Escarpment. This wasn't migration for the sake of tradition. It was a calculated decision made by people who understood their landscape the way an engineer understands a set of blueprints. They didn't find shelter in those canyons. They read the land, and they built their survival directly into its geography. Palo Duro Canyon, the second largest canyon on the North American continent, was the most important of these winter refuges. Its walls drop roughly 700 feet below the surrounding plains. Down on the floor, temperatures are measurably warmer, creek beds supply water, timber grows along the banks, and the sheer rock walls eliminate the worst of the wind entirely. Blanco Canyon, further east near present-day Lubbock, served the same purpose. 30 miles long, cut through with side canyons that created natural hiding places. The Quahati Comanche, the most independent and formidable of all the bands, used it for years as a winter base. When the U.S. Army's Colonel Mackenzie first pushed into Blanco Canyon in 1871, his own soldiers got lost in a dead-end side arroyo in the dark and had to wait until sunrise to find their way out. The Comanche knew every trail in and out by memory. That is not a small detail. That is the difference between a place you occupy and a place you belong to. In winter, the bands arranged their camp in rows along the sheltered canyon floor, close to water and fuel. In summer, when they followed the herds out onto the open plains, they shifted to circular formations. The layout changed with the season because the environment demanded it, and the Comanche answered that demand without hesitation. But geography alone cannot keep a family warm at 2 in the morning. That required the second layer, the tepee itself. And if you think of a tepee as a primitive tent, you have already misunderstood it. The Comanche tepee was a piece of engineering that had been refined across 4 centuries of plains living. It used a 4-pole foundation system, distinct from the 3-pole systems of neighboring tribes, supporting 15 to 25 lodge poles, each one 20 to 30 feet long. The cover required 13 to 16 tanned buffalo hides, stitched together by hand into a surface that could shed wind and rain, while still being light enough to pack and move on short notice. Two design features made it genuinely extraordinary in cold conditions. The first was the smoke flaps, adjustable openings at the top that allowed a fire to burn inside the structure without suffocating the people sleeping in it. This sounds simple. It wasn't. The problem of building a fire inside an enclosed space had defeated most shelter designs throughout human history. You either freeze or you choke. The tepee solved both, simultaneously. The second feature was the inner lining, a secondary layer of hide hung inside the tepee wall, creating a gap of dead air between the outer surface and the living space. Dead air is one of the most effective insulators that exists. It is the same principle behind double-pane windows, except the Comanche were doing it 400 years before that concept had a name. In extreme cold, they stuffed dried grass into that gap, adding another layer of insulation and directing cold drafts upward and away from the people on the ground. The result was a shelter that could be heated with a small fire, held that warmth efficiently, vented smoke without killing its occupants, and could be fully disassembled, loaded onto a horse-pulled travois, moved to a new location, and reassembled in under an hour. And the person responsible for all of that, the one who owned the tepee, built it, maintained it, transported it, and decided exactly where it stood and when it came down, was a Comanche woman. In a world that has consistently erased women from survival history, that fact deserves to be said plainly. The Comanche could not have survived a single winter without the technical knowledge held by their women. That knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations, the same way a warrior's skill with a bow passed from father to son. It was not decoration. It was the foundation everything else rested on. The third layer was the buffalo robe, and the distinction between a robe and a simple hide matters more than most people realize. Hides taken in summer, when the bison's coat is thin, were used for tepee covers, clothing, and moccasins. They had little value against serious cold. Robes were different. They were taken specifically between November and March, when the bison's winter fur had reached its full density. That fur has a structural quality that makes it exceptional as insulation. The individual hairs are hollow. A hollow hair shaft traps air, and trapped air is what stands between your body heat and the freezing world outside. It is the same principle behind modern down-filled sleeping bags and expedition jackets, except it required no factory, no synthetic fill, and no R&D budget. The Comanche layered these robes, one beneath the body to insulate against the frozen ground, one over the body to trap rising heat, turning a simple bed into what we would recognize today as a cold-weather sleeping system. Preparing a single robe took days of physically demanding work, scraping, stretching, softening, and treating the hide until it was supple enough to wrap around a sleeping body without cracking in the freeze. Every robe was the product of that skill, and if you did it wrong, if the hide stiffened and failed in a January night, someone paid for that mistake with frostbite. Or worse, there was no quality control. There was only knowledge, passed down through generations, or lost forever. But even with the canyon blocking the wind, the tepee holding the heat, and the robes wrapping the body, the coldest nights demanded something more. Something that worked not from the outside in, but from the inside out. That is where layers 4 and 5 come in, and they are not what you expect. The fourth layer is the one that sounds almost too simple to work. Before sleeping, rocks were pulled from the riverbed, dense, dry stone that could hold heat without cracking, and placed directly into the campfire. They sat there for hours, absorbing heat deep into their cores. Then, when the fire had done its work, the stones were pulled out, wrapped in leather to prevent burns, and tucked into the bedding. Through the night, long after the flames had died down, those stones kept radiating warmth into the space where a family slept. Some accounts describe water being poured over the heated stones inside the tepee, releasing a sudden burst of steam that raised the interior temperature and pushed moisture back into air that winter had turned brutally dry, and the fire itself was never fully surrendered to the cold. When the last flames dropped to coals, the Comanche covered them with a layer of ash and packed earth, insulating the embers so they held through the night. Come morning, relighting the fire meant uncovering those coals and adding fuel, 2 minutes instead of 30. On a frozen dawn when your hands are stiff and your kindling is damp, that is not a convenience. That is a lifeline. They understood heat transfer without ever writing a single equation about it. They understood it the way you understand breathing. Intuitively, completely. Because if you didn't, you stopped. The fifth layer worked from the inside out, and it is the one modern survival science has taken the longest to fully appreciate. The Comanche diet in winter was built around pemmican, a concentrated mixture of dried buffalo meat, rendered animal fat, and crushed berries, pressed together into a food that carries roughly 450 calories per 100 grams, with fat making up the largest share of that load. That fat content is not incidental. When your body metabolizes fat, the process generates heat, sustained, slow-burning heat that lasts for hours rather than spiking and crashing the way carbohydrates do. The term for it is diet-induced thermogenesis. Modern Arctic survival research has confirmed what the Comanche already knew. A diet built around pemmican provides enough sustained energy for full performance in severely cold outdoor conditions, precisely because of how long the fat takes to burn. They also ate buffalo bone marrow mixed with mesquite beans, another dense, high-fat food chosen not for flavor, but for function. Your body is a furnace. The Comanche understood exactly what fuel it needed to keep burning through a 12-hour winter night, and they engineered every meal they carried around that single fact. And then there was the sixth layer, the one that sounds like love, but was actually engineering. The Comanche acquired their first horses from the Pueblo Indians, following the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. Within a single generation, they had built an entire civilization around those animals. Horses were wealth, measured and traded across a network, stretching from the northern plains deep into Mexico. Horses were weapons. Comanche warriors could hang off the side of a galloping animal, using its body as a shield while firing arrows at full speed, a technique that consistently outmaneuvered U.S. cavalry units, who considered themselves the finest mounted force on the continent. But in winter, horses were something else entirely. A large animal generates significant body heat. The Comanche brought their most valued horses directly inside the tepee at night, and in a structure designed to retain warmth, that living heat source made a real, measurable difference to the temperature where a family slept. Some historical accounts say the Comanche prioritized their best horses' shelter above the comfort of their own family members during the worst cold. That is not cruelty. That is a people who understood something with absolute clarity. At -20 degrees, the line between sentiment and survival strategy disappears very quickly. And the horse that keeps you warm tonight is the horse that carries you to the hunt tomorrow. On the morning of September 28, 1874, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie led roughly 400 soldiers to the rim of Palo Duro Canyon in the pre-dawn darkness. Below them, 700 feet down on the canyon floor, sat the winter camps of Comanche, Kiowa, and Southern Cheyenne bands. They had been gathering there since late summer, stockpiling pemmican, curing robes, reinforcing teepees, preparing for the cold season exactly as their ancestors had done for generations, in this same canyon, behind these same walls. A Kiowa shaman named Mamonte had assured the gathered bands that they were safe here, that the terrain would protect them, that no army could reach them in time to matter. He was wrong. Mackenzie's Tonkawa scouts found a narrow trail down the canyon wall. The soldiers descended single file in the dark. By the time the sun came up, they were already on the floor. A Comanche leader named Red Warbonnet spotted them just before the assault began, but there was no time to mount a coordinated defense. The bands scattered, abandoning their camps, climbing the canyon walls, disappearing onto the plains above. The battle itself produced almost no casualties. One soldier wounded. That number is worth sitting with for a moment, because what came next had nothing to do with combat. Mackenzie burned everything: the tepees, the stored pemmican, the buffalo robes, the dried meat, every cache of winter food the bands had spent months building. He didn't stop there. His soldiers captured over 1,000 horses from the abandoned camps, and Mackenzie ordered every one of them killed. He understood something that pure military victory never could have accomplished, that without the system, the people could not survive what was coming. He didn't destroy an army that morning. He destroyed a library. Centuries of knowledge: how to read the land, how to orient a camp in a canyon, how to build a tepee lining that held warmth through a blizzard, how to tan a robe so it stayed supple at 0 degrees, how to bank coals so the fire survived the night. All of it reduced to smoke and ash on a canyon floor in the Texas Panhandle before noon. The U.S. Army had looked at everything the Comanche built across generations and concluded that the only way to win was to make sure it could never be used again. Most of the bands surrendered by November. The last holdouts gave up in February of 1875. Not because they were beaten in any battle, because winter came. And for the first time in centuries, they had nothing left to face it with. The Comanche Nation still exists. Its headquarters are in Lawton, Oklahoma, and its people carry forward a history that no single morning in a canyon could fully extinguish. Mackenzie burned the physical infrastructure, the poles, the hides, the robes, the food. But there are things that do not burn. The knowledge of how to read a canyon wall for windbreak, the understanding of which stones hold heat the longest, the memory of how a robe needs to be worked, hour after hour, until the hide moves like cloth instead of cracking like wood. That kind of knowledge does not live in buildings. It lives in people, and people, when they survive, carry it forward. What is harder to accept is how much of that knowledge was later adopted without acknowledgement. Modern wilderness survival instructors teach windbreak placement, radiant heat storage, and high-fat cold weather nutrition as foundational principles, often without naming where those principles came from. The sleeping bag rated to 20 below zero, the double-walled expedition tent, the freeze-dried high-fat ration pack designed for Arctic conditions. These are industrial versions of problems the Comanche solved with buffalo hides, canyon walls, and rendered animal fat. The engineering is the same, only the materials changed. The most durable technology in human history was never patented. It was never written into a manual or filed in an archive. It was whispered, mother to daughter, elder to child, passed across campfires that have long since gone cold, in canyons that still stand exactly as they did in 1874. Surviving the cold was never about being tougher than the weather. It was about being smarter than it. But the Comanche understood something that goes even deeper than that. The land does not owe you survival. It never did. You earn it by paying attention to it, by learning its patterns and its cruelties and its rhythms, by listening to it carefully enough and long enough to finally understand what it has been trying to tell you all along.